I'm Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session, and today we're going to be diving deeply into the inner work that's actually needed to shape the leadership we're called to in the 21st century. Now, what is our consciousness, and how does it influence how we show up as leaders? My guest for today will invite us to go on this inner journey as we learn to walk the path of the ecosystemic and more regenerative worlds as they unfold in business and in life. And his name is Giles Hutchins. Now, Giles is a pioneering practitioner, keynote speaker, and executive coach at the forefront of this necessary revolution in leadership. He applies advanced consciousness raising techniques, deep dive nature immersions, embodiment work, and ancient wisdom tradition insights, and also cutting-edge research on leadership consciousness. Giles has over 20 years of business experience in helping all shapes and sizes of organizations transform. Formerly, over a decade as management consultant, program manager, and business practice leads at KPMG, and more recently, global head of sustainability for global technology provider Atos. He is currently chairman of the Future Fit Leadership Academy, lead practitioner of the Natural Business Partnership, co-founder of Biomimicry for Creative Innovation, co-founder of Regenerators, and partner associate with a number of pioneering organizations, such as the Global Leaders Academy, the Laszlo New Paradigm Research Institute, and Asrich Executive Education. Giles has been trained in a host of operational excellence and leadership and organization development approaches and methodologies. His real passion is helping leaders sense into their life purpose, become more conscious, and to help them create the conditions for their organizations to become more vibrant, future fit, living organizations. He has been interviewed by the BBC and contributes to a variety of global networks and institutions. He's also an author, and he authored the books and a blog, The Nature of Business, and the 3 books, The Nature of Business in 2012, The Illusion of Separation in 2014, Future Fit in 2016, and he also co-authored the most recent book, Regenerative Leadership, in 2019. Giles regularly is a guest lecturer at leading universities and business schools, as well as a keynote speaker at conferences like this one. He holds a Master of Science in Business Systems, a Bachelor of Science in Finance, Valuation and Property, and a postgraduate diploma in Advanced Leadership, Global Leadership Development, Gold Certification, Advanced Coaching Certification, Analytic Coaching Network Practitioner, Human Emergence Framework Trained, Solamic, and 5 Deep Holistic Leadership Trained, Way of Counsel Trained, and he's also a certified Reiki Master. Giles has also been a member of various professional associations, for example, the Institute of Directors, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, the Royal Society of Arts. And now he lives on his 60-acre ancient woodland Leadership Immersion Center, Springwood Farm, which is close to London, UK, where he provides bespoke strategic advice, executive coaching, and group immersions for forward-thinking leaders and organizations. And now he's here. So, Giles, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you. I am thrilled to have you here in the Systemic Leadership Summit with us.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Jennifer. And a warm welcome to you too. I look forward to our conversation together.
Yeah, me too. And as we are in the context of the Systemic Leadership Summit, because after this introduction, there's so many different things that we could be talking about. But within this context, could you share with us where, for you, the ecosystemic really started? When did you enter that space in your career?
Wow, that was probably pretty early on in my childhood, a deep sense of connection with nature, with life. And then probably my teenage years, watching some videos that a teacher showed us at the time on animal testing and animal farming, which really shocked me,
Mm-hmm.
led me into a exploration as to what was wrong with our civilization, and that really led me into business to explore if I could understand what the underlying strategy was to business and really get to grips with what was going on in our civilization. So that led me into management consultancy, sustainable business, and so forth. It's only been recently, over the last perhaps 10 years, that I've really become aware of, you know, systemic and ecosystemic. But for me, if we look at what the term really means, at least to me anyway, it's really just being able to be open to life, to be fully connected to life. So that for me is a lifelong journey and experience, really.
Wow, wow. I love that definition, being open to life. And actually, when I hear you speak about how it started for you, it started in childhood, in the connection to nature, and what's wrong with the world when we, let me put it that way, when we hurt nature, when we hurt animals, and when we test on them, what's going on. And so it sounds also like um, what happens to us when we do not embrace life, when we do not fully live in life. Is that how I understood you correctly?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I think I would argue that what we're facing at the moment is a massive crisis or metamorphosis of consciousness, and all of the things that we're facing and dealing with, whether it be climate change or um, systemic problems like inequality and poverty and so forth, that
Yeah.
actually they stem from a deeper underlying sense of disconnection from life, from ourselves, from each other, and from life on Earth. So, yeah, I mean, when we then set out to condone animal testing as part of some business case, or we condone um, strip mining as part of a business case, then really what underpins that is a sense of disconnection to life.
Yeah, yeah. And so what I find so unique is that through that you made a connection with business and the role of business, and how it's possible to through business see if we can not only discover what's going on with the disconnect from nature, but also what is it that we can then do to do the reconnecting, do the re getting back to uh, embracing life and the liveliness. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to ask you, because I know that when we look, for example, at your latest book that you co-authored with Laura Storm, and let me just repeat the title: A Holistic and Systemic Framework for Building Prosperous and Regenerative Organizations. And so it's really about what you just said, to see at what are the conditions to create organizations that are fit for supporting life, for being vibrant, for being future fit, and that there's actually some conditions in terms of how you can help organizations become that. And what are these conditions for organizations to be embracing life and to be future fit?
Well, yeah, I think first it starts, as you know, with us, with how we're showing up in the system as leaders.
Mm,
And so, really, that's a kind of shift in awareness of attentiveness to life. And that shift really is a shift from what we call yesterday's logic to the logic of life. And that, what are we shifting from? Well, yesterday's logic really is a mechanistic logic. It has its roots way back in human civilization, with rising patriarchy, the ego explosion, militarized mind, and so forth, but really culminates with the age of reason scientific revolution, where it becomes dominant and has really become dominant over the last 300 years. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with this way of attending, this reducing down, taking things out of their lived in context, extracting the world around us is an important part of what makes us human. But when that way of attending dominates and crowds out our other ways of knowing, then it actually undermines our systemic capacity to be in touch with life. So we have to shift from a dominant way of attending, which has come too much really, and loosen or reconnect. And that shift, I talk about at 3 levels really. The first level at the mind, the cognitive level, what Otto Scharmer refers to as open mind, Peter Senge and others refer to as systems thinking. That is where we map out the interconnections with inside our team dynamics, our organizational dynamics, our business ecosystem. So that's your giga mapping, that's your informational technology and process mapping, that's your circular economic work and so forth. And that there's a lot of good work happening there at the moment, some work I'm doing with a design agency at the moment, which transcends, public-private partnerships, multi-stakeholders and so forth to make systemic change happen. So that's important, but that's at the head level. That's
at the mind level.
The mind level. And then the second part is a more embodied aspect, and that's what I call systemic awareness. And that's where we really sense into the system, the inner, the outer aspects of the system, not just outer projection of the mind maps, but actually sensing that inner aspect, the implicit, the psychological, the stuckness, the flows, the acupuncture points. And this is where systemic constellation work, social presencing, systemic coaching is all part of that to enable us to start opening up and what Otto Scharmer calls open heart. So we're starting to have an empathic, receptive engagement with the system. It's more feminine and masculine rather than just masculine. And then the third aspect is often overlooked, and that really is the taproot that holds the logic of life, is the ecosystemic. And that Otto Scharmer refers to as open will, which is a sort of shift from a small ego self to actually our ego permeating with a deeper sense of interconnectedness with how life really is. So we shift from yesterday's logic, the logic of neo-Darwinism and anthropocentric perspective, where we see humanity as separate from nature. We view life as something that only serves humanity, and we try and measure it as such. And we see the whole process of evolution really as separate species struggling for survival in a dog-eat-dog world, which is an undermining of Darwin's original observations, and certainly an undermining of what we know of how life really is. So opening up at the ecosystemic level is a deep sense of interconnectedness with life. An embodied shift, what Claire Graves and other adult developmental psychologists have referred to as tier 2 awareness, where we're actually tuning into life. It's an existential shift. And all of those 3 levels, at the head level, the systems thinking, more embodied systemic awareness, and then opening up to life at the ecosystemic level are key. So that's the first condition that we need as leaders ourselves to be able to then sense into the organization as a living, vibrant, future fit organization.
Right. So thanks for that intro about that it starts with leaders, and so of course there could be different entry points, and what you say about leaders and why we have the mind, heart. I forgot the third one: the mind, the heart, and the will from Theory U, or the systems. More the systems type of logic, the embodiment, and then the ecosystemic, deeper awareness and deeper connection to all that's connected to life. And but isn't it a chicken and egg thing? I mean, we could start with leaders, but why don't we start somewhere else?
Well, I don't think it really matters where we start. I was just suggesting we start with ourselves. I mean, I think that's always a good place. But of course, there is an inner and outer dynamic here. We also have to change the systems that we're involved with. And that's perhaps one of the benefits of starting with leaders, because of their influence in the systems. But
Yeah.
I was an entrepreneur in an organization, in a global organization. And whilst I was a director and I had a practice that I ran as a business unit, part of my job was to actually protect the team in a way from the hierarchy,
Yeah.
and so that we could be a bit more self-organizing, a bit more developmental. So yeah, you start with where you're at, really.
Yeah.
But yes, changing the system is very much important out there. I think the challenge comes when we change the system out there and it becomes an outer projection again, an outer activity, which of course actually is a slipshod into yesterday's logic, where we
Right.
help to objectify, we push the thing out there, we make it more action focused and masculine and doing, and we impoverish the inner and the being. So we just need to balance both. It's an alchemy of both.
Right, right. Well, thanks for speaking to that, because what I find when I work with leaders is that um, it's it's not always a compelling journey to go into, because there's so much safety into to the older sort of paradigm that we've had for centuries. And so I guess my question was, but if we go beyond that sort of evident type of idea of course it starts with us because we have so much influence in the systems that we lead, um, and it's a big jump. So that's why I asked you, what else does it require from leaders to actually start embracing this notion and going on this journey?
Well, I think what we talk about in the book is this living systems design, where we can change the way in which we design our products, our
Mm-hmm.
processes, and the places that we work in. So biophilic design, for instance, or biomimicry, where we design products that are more sustainable, or circular economics. So a lot of that stuff that is actually quite developed at the moment. It's not
Mm-hmm.
extreme, but there's a lot of good work already happening in that space. So you can quite quickly gain inspiration, case studies from other companies doing that work.
Yeah.
But then there's also the living systems culture piece, where we actually look at the culture itself and how we make that more developmental. And we look at the purpose of the organization, how we are interrelating, and our self-organizing systems and so forth. And then there's the living systems being piece, where we are creating a quality of being in ourselves and through our relationships that infuse that actually underpins all of it. So for a leader wanting to just sort of start, then nothing more simple really than noticing how we truly listen, how we listen to ourselves. Are we quietening our mind? Are we able to quieten our mind to get beyond the noise? And how do we truly listen to the other person when we're down the corridor, or we're next to the coffee machine, or wherever it is? How are we listening? Are we creating a space that is generative, or are we on autopilot, or are we on fight flight? Got to get on, got to rush through. And I think that's a simple step. One of the things
Mm.
that we do on our leadership immersions is just deepen that quality of deep listening, because from that place we can start tapping into the systems, the systemic and the ecosystemic.
Right, right. And is that also where then the stepping, almost stepping away from being separated to being more connected, is that's where that starts? Because listening requires that you're open to whatever's there, or trying to tune in to what's there and what's really being said, or trying to be heard by you as a listener.
Yeah,
So
it's an opening up, isn't it? It's a receptivity. It's an act of love, really, because we are opening our defenses. We're opening our ego, which is there to help protect us, but often gets in the way and creates that separateness. So how do we just, through breathing, I mean, simple belly breathing, being more relaxed, relaxation, very key. How do you do that in the middle of stress and anxiety and pressure? Well, actually you can. There's lots of little techniques that can help with that. And that allows us to just open. and then be present. As you say, in the act of listening itself actually helps us then open up to ourselves and to others. So actually listening, rather than it being something that we kind of have to do and have to exert pressure in, actually becomes the very medium that opens us up to life.
Right, right. And so I want to zoom in a little bit more about um, this dynamic of separation and connection. And you wrote a whole book about it called Illusion of Separation. And so why would you call it an illusion?
Well, that's quite a big question. Where do I start with that? So, yeah, I mean, Sigmund Freud and then Carl Jung and many other psychologists really started exploring the ego as an aspect of our psychology.
Mm-hmm.
That is very useful. It's there to help create a sense of separation, really, because otherwise we would get completely enthralled and overawed with this fluid connectiveness of how life really is. Ian McGilchrist, in his work as a neuroscientist, talks about the left and right brain hemispheres, and again how the left brain hemisphere, in line with that ego awareness, actually job it is to limit the interconnectedness that we see, so that we can focus in and get the job done and have some kind of perspective, which we need in everyday life. The problem comes, there's nothing wrong with separateness, it's actually a very healthy part of life. It's how we balance that separateness and connectedness, how we allow the two to interweave all the time. The problem comes when we get so caught up in separateness that we actually believe that the world is full of separate beings. So then we've created an illusion, actually what Albert Einstein called a delusion of our
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. And that's
Yeah.
what we've done. That's what we live in today. We actually believe that we're separate beings struggling for survival in a dog-eat-dog world. And that kind of ideology pervades our business methods, it pervades our decision-making processes, it pervades our society, and even the way we educate our children. And so it's an illusion that we've created in our own minds, and it's creating devastating consequences.
Mm-hmm. So I think that the key word that you just mentioned is that there is some sort of balance or preventing of over separating or over compartmentalizing the world, because part of being a human being and functioning in day-to-day life is actually being able to focus so that we can make decisions, especially also when you fill a leadership role. But on the other hand, there's a lot that we actually leave behind in terms of connection with life itself when we swing the pendulum one way and go in for almost the full illusion of separation. And so yeah, what I hear you say actually is like an open invite to explore what it means to go into the space of connectedness more and bring that into your leadership in terms of um, quietening down the mind and relaxing and really listening into um, what's going on with the people you lead, what's going on in the system, in your organization, so that having access to both spheres, so to speak, um, it will actually create more. And I don't necessarily like the word balance, but I mean there is some sort of having access to both these worlds as we are evolving into maybe a necessary shift that we need to make in order to to create less of a disconnected world, so to speak.
Yeah, well, that's very well, put together. I agree with everything that you said. Yeah, and this is what enables us to sense into how life really works, and therefore create organizations. I mean, the funny thing, Jennifer, is that this illusion of separation has actually created the problems that we face today, and it's actually created the very environment that might wake us up or might enable us to interweave more readily with separateness and connectedness, because we can't deal with these systemic challenges that we face now with the mechanistic separateness logic. It just won't work. The problems are so interconnected and wicked. And so our organizations, to actually survive this VUCA time, but also to thrive, we need to create living systems. Now, I say create living systems, I mean, that's even a problem, because the system's already alive.
Yeah.
It's just us being able to sense into the living system. So it's our awareness of opening up into what is already there. So it's not that we're creating living organizations. The organization was always alive. It's the fact that we're trying to treat it as a machine, and and in the process, we're kind of sweating its assets, but actually killing the poor thing. What we need to be doing is just allowing more, but at the same token, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and then just throwing all the metrics and all the efficiency and effectiveness and all the ability to program, manage, and engineer out the window. That's silly. We have a left and a right brain hemisphere and a head and a heart for good reason. So it's just refinding that balance in the midst of having to upstretch into a new way of operating in a very difficult environment. So that's the real challenge, because of course our businesses are facing all sorts of systemic challenges and enabling our organizations to have to repurpose, to have to create solutions and strategies that actually serve life rather than just serve an aspect of society. So that is a shift in itself. And I would argue the two go very much hand in hand. You can't do one without the other. The outer and the inner are interconnected here. So it's actually, whilst it's a very challenging, it's a hugely exciting time for us to step into real life.
Yeah. And so something that as you were speaking, what clicked for me is that we actually created a world where we're forced to change and embrace life again. And I find that fascinating, as if we, almost as if we moved away from it and created something that is more about something else than life, and that we now have an environment that's forcing us to go back to life. So I find that fascinating, as if it's almost like a breathing in and out, or a sort of like a cycle of things that's just coming full circle or something. So, and I'm just wondering, because somewhere in this, what we were just discussing, the word, what came up is what makes us human, or what's life about. And I am now wondering if in all the ecosystem, if we are really, and that goes back to the world of illusion, if we are really able to create something that completely separates us from how life actually works, because everything's connected anyway, whether we think it is or not. And so there's always going to be some sort of force that's going to put us back where we need to embrace life again. So that just popped up for me.
Yeah. Well, this is the beautiful thing about when we explore the logic of life or living systems, is it opens us up to wisdom, essentially, that is timeless, that's there, and that we have access to all the time. It's not some privileged thing. We can tap into it, and so it's accessible for all of us, and that I find hugely liberating and gives me hope. When I take leaders out into nature and we sit around the fire and do some very simple practices, you can see how people are starting to tap into wisdom, into source that's coming through them. And what we see when we really look into nature is we see these tensions. They're not even polarities, really. They're kind of dances. And a major dance is one of dilation and contraction, or you could say divergence and convergence, where we have something that's opening up and diversifying and becoming more alive, more creative. And then balancing that is the bringing together is the sense of purpose, is the alignment. And of course, if we go too far in any one of those, that's when we start getting out of tune, out of flow, out of emergence that comes out of that divergence and convergence. So a lot of this is about creating flow in ourselves, in our systems, and then noticing, having the awareness as leaders or ecosystemic facilitators to actually notice when a particular system is starting to go out of flow. It's getting too creative, too divergent, too chaotic, or it's getting too convergent, too focused, too rigid. And just holding that space, which of course is quite liberating when you then add in the dynamic of life that you were talking about, which is this a death rebirth, this kind of spring, summer, autumn, winter, spring, summer, autumn, winter, which is that everything's going through these cycles of changes. And so in a way, we're then able to hold space for something beautiful, something wise, something amazing, something that is very awe-inspiring and reverential for us as human beings. And that helps us, I think, I feel, get out of our egos a bit and more into the receptive space of holding an environment for life to come through, to be in service of life rather than caught up in the bits and pieces of it all.
Yeah, yeah. And what fascinates me is that um, just at the beginning of what you just said, you mentioned how you take leaders into nature and you sit around the fire, you do some you do what you called very basic um, practices. And I'm really interested also in what happens before you take them into nature. In other words, as ecosystemic facilitators, I feel that we're at the point where this this field of the systemic and the ecosystemic is really, 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 really necessary. And so I am really keen on hearing from you. What do you do with the inviting? How do you invite? Because before you can hold space for all these things to happen, for leaders to step into um, going into the connectedness more, and going into nature more and doing these practices and saying yes to more of the embodiment and the change in what happens in the mind. Um, what do you do as an ecosystemic facilitator to invite them into that space?
Well, it's another quite big question, even though it doesn't feel like it, because of course there's nested levels to this, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it is quite personal in terms of what each person wishes, feels is right for them and their own practice and their own way of viewing the world. But for me, a powerful aspect to this is intention. I'm interested, when we talk about flow, people who have researched flow in many years have explored how really flow is created through intention and attention. Again, there's this word tension in both of them. This is healthy tension again. And what I'm really creating in a field, the field work, is nesting layers of intention. So when I say, for instance, choose a co-facilitator to work with, or she or he chooses to work with me, then already there's just starting to create an alchemy, a sense around, well, what are we doing this workshop on? What's the general inquiry here? It may be as wide and deep as connecting to self, source, and system, or it might be something more specific around diversity and inclusion or developmental cultures, whatever. But then in that whole process of already coming together and holding space, you're already starting to create a field. And then when you then invite people, if it's an open program, you're inviting people, and you're also opening up to the field to allow people to come in, or if you're working with a particular organization or leadership team, then I am setting intentional work quite early on, and working at an energy level to create a space, a deep space that is safe for those people, to open up to different parts of themselves and to truly connect with others and with the field. Then I think the most important thing is after that is to have the right space. Now, you don't always have the right physical space. I'm fortunate here that we've got ancient woodland that has a deep energy, so that kind of works, and it works wonders. But I also get asked to do something in a basement in some building, and it's funny because, you know, it's some trendy basement in a kind of branding consultancy that's been sort of painted nice colors, and whoever's introducing it, the last one I did, you know, she explained how what a wonderful space we're in, we're lucky to be in this space. And of course, for me, I'm thinking, whoa, you know, the energy is just very different in here. But you have to work with it. I've worked with 50 or 60 suit executives in the basement of a big conference room, you know, and you just have to work with that. And again, creating that intention in the space, actually going into the space and giving it that sense. So I always go the night before or a few hours before in the morning, and you're creating that space. Then there's something about really connecting with each individual person, and then getting that group to start feeling safe with each other. And this is where deep listening comes in, dialogue work, small group work, and so forth, and embodiment work, getting everybody. And I've had, you know, people from engineering tech companies in suits and ties doing qigong in a basement. And yeah, as long as they see that they believe in you, and they have the trust in you, and they see that you're doing it, they start dropping out of the what am I doing, why am I doing this, and they start connecting. And so all of this is really just, we're just creating space for people to open up, to start loosening the armory that we have that keeps us separate.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, I love that about creating the space and filling it with intention. And again, like you said, for many facilitators, working with the systemic or the ecosystemic, it's a personal thing, and there's also an aspect that's non-personal that has to do with um, just like we talked about in the beginning, for leaders who then can create the conditions for organizations to be vibrant and future fit and connected to life. It's all about creating a space and environment that facilitators then do for the leaders to step into that journey. And for you, that starts with an intention, that starts with creating the safety, creating the tuning into the people, so that they can feel safe with each other, and they can move as individuals, and they can also move as a system or as a collective as they are in that room. And and thanks for the examples also about whether you are in the space that you have out in nature where you are, or if you're in the basement, that regardless of where you are, it's important that you somehow create that space or co-create that space with people who are there, so that it supports this, stepping into embodying this more connected field, this systemic and more lively field, so that they can also incorporate that, embody that into their daily life and work, and not just be all frantic about what's the next thing that's on my plate that I need to do. And wow, there's so many things that I want to ask you next about this. Um, because one is I wanted to talk about the embodiment piece. Ever since you said it just a few minutes ago, I'm looking. I have this image in my mind of suit and tie people doing qigong. But what's the part of embodiment in this whole journey that you invite them on? So once they are safe, once they step into the space that you filled with intention, um, when does their embodying start, and how big of a role is it in their journey?
Yeah. Well, I'll probably start with a little bit of research. Carl Jung, obviously godfather really of psychotherapy in many ways, his life research explored 4 different ways of knowing that we have within inside ourselves: the intuitive, the rational, the emotional, and the somatic being our body sensations. And we got to meet people where they're at. We are overly in the rational, analytic, to such an extent that that way of knowing is suppressing the other 3, the intuitive, the emotional, and the somatic. So we have to cross a threshold in this ecosystemic work. What we're doing is creating an environment where we can allow those different ways of knowing to start integrating with inside ourselves so that we can open up. And it's what I call activating our supernature. We talk about it in the book, Regenerative Leadership. And so that's what we're doing. We're helping create that shift to integrate these different ways of knowing with inside ourselves. But that's words. In practice, what are we doing? We are allowing that mind to just quieten, the grasping to stop. Now, you could just go straight at it with mindfulness. I've, through my experience, find that that isn't always the best way with suits and ties or whatever. That actually, to start off with, you need to feed it a bit rather than fight it. Go with it, give it love. And so it may be in a particular environment where you can tell it's quite tight, that actually you start off with a talk that, or some form of information, a mini vignette or masterclass or something that satisfies that rational analytic mind. So it feels, oh, okay. Then move into and explain why we're then starting to integrate this, and perhaps give some research around emotional intelligence. That's been well known within business for 20 years, but actually not so many people know in business around this somatic, embodied knowing that we have within our body, even though there's a lot of science proving this. So you might talk about the intelligence of the gut and the heart. You might talk about the neurological network and the psychosomatic network, something that again is satisfying that rational analytic mind, but then opening a doorway into why we are now going to do something that they would naturally think is odd. And so it reminds me of the picture I've got in my mind of this group of 100 people at this conference in this very square rectangular basement room. How the gentleman who ran the business that was hiring me in said, they're not going to do this. I know these participants. These were 100 people from they were all quite tech orientated people, CIOs, some CEOs. He said they're not going to want to do it, and I'm going to watch. I'm going to be interested in how you deal with it when people resist and don't do it. So already the kind of my potential co-facilitator was kind of standing away. But by giving that talk, by gaining that trust, and this is where the intention is coming in, you're already working with them, you're already engaging with them and connecting with them in the room. Then when we started doing it, literally everybody did. Yes, there were a couple of people who were resisting. And even the guy who said he wasn't going to do it, the guy who talked to me and said, oh, I'm going to watch. And I can't do it because I've got a frozen arm. So he already had his reason for not doing it. Even him, within a few minutes, because everybody else was doing it, he just naturally started doing it. I could see he was doing the embodiment one. Of course, he did his frozen arm a lot of good. So people will. I mean, we just need the right invitation. We need to meet people where they're at. So it's not about something woo-woo. It's not about something that, gosh, what is that? Why am I doing this? You need to satisfy all of that first. That's creating that field for them to feel comfortable. And then they love it. And then from there, you can slip into something deeper, like deep listening. And then already people are feeling something and they know it. They're in their feeling body rather than their rational mind. A key thing I'd have to say, a kind of hygiene factor, core factor really, is ensuring that their mobile phones are off.
Definitely. You don't want the world calling in at that point and disturbing the space and the safe container that was created for them to do that. Phones can pull them out of that again. And thank you for the example and for the run through about how you do that. And so I'm just curious, because I want to sit with this for just one more minute. and see what is it that you do inside yourself to like, not, for example, like step back like everyone else and say, okay, let's see how he's doing that now. But so how do you stay with it? What do you do in your inner system, just besides the intention, besides the holding space? What else is it that you do to step into it, even though there's all these messages around you where people are saying, oh, I'm not doing it, I'm not stepping into it, or they're not going to go, or things like that? How do you make sure that you put yourself over that edge?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is what we just started the discussion with, which is love,
Mm,
which is
mm,
receptivity, which is openness. So just being open. And what I've found, of course, it comes with practice, is that there's also something about trusting life. So things will arise, things will happen. Someone will come into the room, someone won't have left their phone on, their phone will ring, or someone will be struggling a bit, or some couple of people will be trying to look at each other and giggle or laugh, whatever it is
yeah,
going on. And it's usually the child in them is arising that's trying to distract them, or the ego is trying to go, oh, no, hang on a minute, one has to trust in it and go through that. So again, the image that's coming to mind was in a business school where we had again quite a big group, not as big as 50. It was about 30 sitting in circle. So it was already halfway through the day, so we already had a deep space, and one or two people, people were crying and stuff, and one or two people were going through a very profound breakthrough. You could see that. But we had lunch, and we were sitting in this greenhouse before we went back out into nature again. And the lady who wanted to come in and take away the cutlery came in, and rather than just sort of noticing we were in circle and leaving, she came in and did the cutlery very quietly. So every little teaspoon she picked up, she did very quietly and very slowly, to the point that all we could hear, sitting in circle very quietly, concentrating on being present with other people, was this person in the background moving cutlery very slowly and painfully. And what was interesting was how, to start off with, that was a distraction for myself. And I noticed how I was starting to think, well, why, that this isn't helping. Do I need to be protective of the space? And then I noticed others as well, being aware of it. And I just sat with it and go through it. And that's where practice helps, to sort of trust in life and just to go through it, and to open up to it. And of course, this challenge was actually the very gem, or the grit was the very thing that revealed a gem for the group. Because of
yeah,
course, then when we shared, they were going, oh, I found that interruption we had, and I was really struggling with that. I was trying to be aware and conscious of listening in circle, and yet they were taking the cutlery out so slowly. It was painful. It was distracting me, until I came to the realization that, well, we're full of distractions all the time in our life. And this is no point about just meditating in a room or having an experience in a circle. If I can't look beyond that, if I can't free myself from that distraction, then this is no use to me. So I then freed myself, and then realized I was viewing that person with frustration, almost anger, and it was
yeah,
taking me out. And as soon as I let go of it, I started opening up and no longer noticed the distraction, and I was more present with the person. So people were having mini threshold crossings as a result of the disturbances. So in that room again with those big executives and senior people, how does one trust what is going to go on? And I think
yeah,
the more we work with life, and the more that we make our work in service of life, the more actually either we're able to see the synchronicities, or the more that things show up in a kind of weird and wonderful way that actually helps, even though sometimes if we're in the slightly wrong mindset, we might see it as a hindrance. So how do
yeah,
we almost see the grit as the pearl?
yeah, yeah. Wow, wow. What popped up for me is that as you're explaining this example, and thank you so much of it for it, because it makes it so tangible. It makes it so I'm sure that everyone who's watching can resonate with this, is that sometimes the disturbance is the work, and sometimes the this disturbance or the things that we think is this hindering now is part of the invitation to go even deeper um, into trusting that what's unfolding or what's happening, that there is an invitation in that, instead of something that we project our anger or frustration on, but that there's something underneath. And trusting that what life is showing us, or what's showing up in a moment of something that was intended to be quite mindful, that that's actually what it's all about. And so as you're sharing your experiences about how you work with intention, with the space, with trusting life, and with creating that holding container for leaders to step into and do their journey in the inner work. There's in your story, there's also an embodiment of what leaders could do, as we are talking in this session about the inner work that is needed to create these conditions to then help co-create organizations that are more future fit. And so what I wanted to ask you, when we look at when you work with clients, and when you work with these groups of leaders, big or small, whether in your immersion center or in a basement and everything in between, how did that transform your own leadership in your work, in your life?
Well, again, wow, where to start with that? I mean, it's ongoing. I mean, I think, to use what you've just been talking about, this trusting in life, it's a kind of ongoing, isn't it? Sort of mini thresholds, almost like every day and night is a sacred passage, is a threshold crossing. So for me, I suppose it's helping me celebrate life, to celebrate each day, to follow the guidance, the divine guidance, the awareness of what's happening, the synchronicities. I mean, my life has just become so much more synchronistic. Is it more synchronistic, or is it just that I'm just more aware of it? So yeah, I mean, the whole way the woodland, I connected with the woodland was bizarre, really, from setting an intention one morning to then the next day an email coming in about this woodland. So it's almost proving to me the work I'm doing. So I'm constantly always being sort of tested about, walking it, doing it, being it. And that is an ongoing journey, which is rich, full of all sorts of hazards and tripwires and ego projections. But actually, really underneath it all, I can feel this deep soul dance that's just coming up, that's coming through. So for that, I'm hugely thankful. Really, my thanks is also to my family, my wife, and my two daughters, which is, I think, a core part of that. Is core part of this soulful attentiveness and rejuvenating, so that I can do the work. Because actually, when I hold space for leaders, whilst I'm very present and very connected to nature, I do pick up stuff. So it can be after a couple of days workshop deep in nature that I need to clear, I need to reconnect, even though I've been very present and connected. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer, because while we're doing this work, just to continue on to that very last point that you made, is that we can't close off, you can't close ourselves off in the role of facilitator or leading a group. There's always stuff that we pick up on, because we're also, especially when we're around embracing life, the connectedness, from that connection, we also pick up things that sometimes need processing, or that we want to sort of clean out our systems again from all the work that we've been doing and the things that we've been holding. And so I also hear you refer to your family system, and how important it is to have good awareness of your own home system. And even though there is a very nurturing place in a nurturing space that you were pulled towards, let me put it that way. We never know whether where that started, that connection, whether it came to you, that you pulled yourself to it. But next to that space in nature, that there's also your family system and other systems that also help us to keep on feeling the connectedness, and to be fueled by, to then go back out and to do this work again.
Yeah, and that
So
can come out at different times, back to this separateness and connectedness, or the wound, or the history, or anything. Any movement is unsettling, and yet liberating. And so moving the children here, for instance, and wife and myself, on the one hand, opens up a vista, a new horizon. We see with new eyes. We embrace life in a richer way, but on the same token, it comes with a change. And it's been interesting watching my two daughters. Often when I meet people here, they're going, "Oh, how are your kids settling?" And I'm like, "Yeah, no, it's great. They've really adapted well." And then I realized, well, actually, it's come in waves. Maybe they've been here now a couple of months already, but then, for instance, yesterday I was with my youngest daughter, 4-year-old Hazel, and we had a lovely time together at Forest School, just me and her. And then we came back, and as we were in the living room, she just was hugging me and my wife, and crying, because she had just remembered something of before, where we used to live. And now, was she releasing something? Was she being triggered for something? Or, and so, nothing's linear. It's all messy, and it's all happening. And so, add to that the pressures that leaders are under. And this is one of the things I really notice when I hold space for leaders, is how often one of the key findings for them is they realize, oh my God, I'm bringing all of this home. I'm projecting it on my children, on my wife, or my husband. I haven't got time. I say to them I'm going to be present with them, but then I'm still looking at my phone. All of the simple little things, back to the deep listening where we started, of practicing that, being with us, so that whatever's coming up for us can actually come up, rather than being fragmented, pushed away. So yeah.
Wow. Giles, we've been talking about the inner work for leaders to create vital and future fit organizations. And we're almost at our time boundary. And I just wanted to ask you, if it were up to you, if there's only one thing that you'd like our viewers to take with them from this session, what would that be?
To trust in life. I think what we've been saying, which is to truly recognize that this, whether we call it systemic, ecosystemic, or systems thinking, this shift in consciousness is nothing more nor nothing less than us opening up, allowing ourselves to really be in touch with how reality really is. So it's an allowing. Let's not get too caught up in all of the tools and techniques. Really, it's just an opening up, a trusting in life.
I don't think we could have ended on a better note. We've been talking about it, and the most important thing is to trust life. And so that's an invitation to everyone who's been watching. Giles, it was a delight to talk to you about this journey. And thank you so much for also sharing from your practice, from your own personal experience around the journey towards more connectedness and towards more embracing life, especially as leaders. So thanks so much for being on.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for the work you do. And thank you for bringing your lovely energy to this work. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And to everyone who's been watching, if you want to take the conversation further and continue talking about trusting life, about creating space from your role as a leader or maybe as a systemic facilitator, then please go to our online community space. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. See you next session. Bye-bye.